Hey there, everybody. I'm Conor McCreery, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's January 15th, 2021. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Conor McCreery about The Last Witch. The podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. Conor has written for Dynamite, Boom, Titan, and DC. He's probably best known, though, as a co-creator of Kill Shakespeare, the swashbuckling tale published by IDW, which has been adapted for the stage and is being developed for television. Past his prologue, Juliet, is the 5th chapter in the award-winning series. Conor's current project is the Last Witch series for Boom. So without further ado, here's my chat with Conor McCreery about The Last Witch. So Conor McCreery, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Oh, you're very welcome, John. I'm pleased to be here with the True North.
Well, I appreciate your time. What I normally do to start off the interview is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
The first comic book that I read. I mean, I don't have like a clear memory of one, so it'll be like one of three, I would think. It would either be like an Archie Comic Digest, or when I was a kid, my dad's from Ireland, and I remember we went on a trip when I was probably like 5 or 6, and over there they have comics called the Beano and the Buster, which are like English comics, and I know I read them then. I remember, or at least, or probably more read to me. I mean, at 5, I probably read, I read some, but not all the way through for sure. And then the only other thing I can think of, and this probably isn't first, but it's one of the first ones I have a memory of. It's definitely not first because it's too far in the time continuum. But I know some of the first comics I collected, at least, were Web of Spider-Man.
Good stuff. Yeah. So very good books to start off with. But I'm wondering who or what inspires you today to create.
Oh man, I mean, there's so many things, right? I mean, I feel like it's interesting because comics being a serial medium, I feel like there's a lot of television that kind of gets me excited in addition to comics creators. I mean, I've been, I picked up a couple of things. I picked up Blue is Green, the Ram V book that just came out about this kind of musician who's sort of going mad, and it's really, really interesting. And I also picked up Jean Ying Lang's basketball book because I'm a huge basketball fan. So I picked that up, and the next one on my list is Sports is Hell. But before that, what else have I been reading? I mean, I finally kind of got into Monstrous, which I'm enjoying.
Right.
There's a book called Decelerate Blue that I picked up at a book fair a little while ago and got to. But then, I think a lot of stuff that's kind of inspired me. Like I'm working on some sci-fi stuff right now, so I've been watching stuff like The Expanse, which I is really interesting and has kind of lived up to its moniker, kind of Game of Thrones in space for me. And then I've been doing some kids book stuff lately. Last Witch being one of them. And so stuff like Dragon Prince and Avatar, Legend of Korra, I've been watching a lot of those. I've got a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old and now a newbie, a 4-month-year-old. But me and the older two, we've been watching some of those animated series, and really, I found those really inspiring. They're really well done.
Yeah, speaking of animated series, we were just watching Wolfwalkers on Apple TV, and speaking of, you talked about Last Witch and the sort of the Irish theme. I'm wondering if you had seen that or the other ones, Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea.
So I saw Secret of Kells a number of years ago and really, really enjoyed it. And I saw Wolfwalkers probably about 2 weeks ago, and I'd heard about it for a while, and when I was still kind of in the mud, and in the muck of trying to get The Last Witch wrestled into the form I wanted it to take, I avoided it a little bit just because I wanted to kind of make sure that I knew once I saw it I was going to love it, and I wanted to make sure I didn't get influenced by it potentially too heavily. But I did see it, and it's so good. My kids like. It's funny because I try to remember what I promised. Like we were gonna watch something, and then I kind of pulled rank, and I'm like, we're gonna watch this Wolfwalkers film. They're both like, oh, like, and then like within like 5 minutes, they were just both like, it's like, well, let's give it a chance. Let's give it 5 minutes, and we watched for like 5 minutes, and they were both just absorbed. And I think after it finished, I think my daughter was like, that's the best movie I've ever seen. It's so good. I love that studio. I love the stuff they do. I love. Obviously with Last Witch is also a Celtic tale. I love Irish fairy tales, and I love Celtic fairy tales. That's actually probably a huge inspiration for me, really, because my dad, I mentioned my dad is Irish, and so I grew up reading a lot of these Irish fairy tales as I got older, and they're all a little off. They're a little wrong in the right way, and they're dark. They're a little, they're too scary in the right way for kids, and so. Yeah, I love that stuff. They're just wonderful tales. I mean, I'm biased because it's my culture, but man, I really do like them.
That's good stuff. Now we've sort of skirted around the issue, but want to talk about your latest work, The Last Witch from Boom. So I wonder if you could talk a little about the origin of this series.
Oh, for sure. So The Last Witch, I guess to kind of put it in context, The Last Witch is a dark fairy tale that follows this young girl named Saoirse, 12 years old, who goes wandering into the woods on the one day of the year that this witch, the Cailleach, is kind of rumored to roam. And it's sort of this myth that she's grown up with that she doesn't think a heck of a lot of, and she wants to sort of prove to the people of her small village who kind of see her as this like outcast. She wants to prove to them that she's something more. And so The Last Witch is, it follows this little girl, and eventually it kind of ends up seeing her pit against this coven of witches who are looking to unleash something foul into our world. But the book actually started in a bit of a weird place. Some time ago, a friend of mine who runs a small publishing company in the East Coast, or did at the time, was putting out a charitable book, an anthology called Fearsome Fables. And so he was reaching out to people in the Canadian comics and writing scene and asking would they submit. And I said I'd be happy to do something, especially for a charity book. But I was like, look, I'm not an artist. I can't get to anything comics-wise quickly enough. So maybe you might want to choose someone else because I don't have an artist at hand for anything. And he said, no, well, why don't you try some prose? Which I hadn't. I mean, I actually have a background as a journalist, so I'm not like super uncomfortable in the notion of writing, writing prose, I suppose. But it's different journalism versus fictional prose, and so. He kind of talked me into it. And so I wrote this story about this little girl, Saoirse, going into the woods on this quest to find this crumbling tower that may or may not contain a witch. And so when I was talking to Boom, I'd been fortunate enough to do some stuff with them, like Adventure Time and Regular Show. And an editor there had sort of said, well, do you have anything else? Do you have anything you'd want to pitch to us for Boombox, for the creator-owned imprint? And, I had a whole whack of stuff. Normally I'm like really super in-depth when I pitch stuff. I'm the guy who sends like a 35-page pitch. And I'm like, don't read the last 25 pages unless you want to. Like, there's a few pages of art and then like a one-page summary and then some character sketches. But if you want to know the rules of magic in this world or how technology works or the history of the Martian, lunar war, it's all in the appendix. So, I have lots and lots of stuff. But right. For Last Witch, all I had was this short story about a girl who goes in the woods and meets a witch and comes out changed. But in the short story, she's more changed by the experience as a person as opposed to anything else. And so I kind of really quickly, and I like the idea, so I kind of quickly wrote up that, she goes in and it's going to be the first step in her, like I said, fighting this coven of witches who are trying to bring this eater of the world, across the kind of this magical barrier. And that's all I had. And so, of course, that's the one of all the things I sent where I had boatloads of stuff I could have then produced if they said, oh, we want to do this, rock, paper, scissors in the future one. I would have been like, sure, here's a script. I've got it written. This one, I had nothing. And they're like, wow, this sounds so great. Like, you're talking about, the coven and this eater of the world. Like, can you send us on Monday? Just send us a whole bunch, just send us all the backup material so we can see what's going on. And thankfully it was a Friday, so that weekend I was just putting my head down, trying to be like, well, I don't know, who the hell is in this coven?
Right.
But thankfully I put enough stuff together that made enough sense that the original editor on the book, Whitney, was like, yeah, this is really cool. I'd really be into putting this book forward. And between kind of her initial pitch and the kind of final pitch you do at Boom, I had enough time to really think it out and start to put the story in place. And thankfully the rest of Boom was on board and thought it was a really cool adventure.
Cool. And the rest is history. There you go. Well, last year this time, Boom announced the book as The Last Witch, Fair and Fire as original graphic novel. And now we're seeing it in reality as a series. So I'm wondering, how did that change come about?
COVID would be the short answer.
Okay.
It's a bit of a funny story. So it actually started with a bit of just miscommunications. So the original commissioning editor, Whitney, she and I had talked, and we talked about how it was going to be a relatively long graphic novel, somewhere in the range of 230 to 250. It was going to be, and we've been talking about how it's, in some ways it feels like it's an all ages book, but it's really almost a YA book, really, when you get into it in a lot of ways. And so we'd been like, yeah, that seems like an appropriate length to really create a satisfying story. And somehow between her heading out to Random House and the new editor, Shannon Waters, coming on, just communication got dropped, and there was just a misunderstanding. And so I deliver this book, and Shannon's like, wow, this is great, but I was expecting 150 pages, not 250 pages. And I was like, oh, crap. So then we worked it up to, it was going to be, we could do it to 180 pages. But after talking, Shannon was like, I don't know where we could cut that much of the book. The book is too tightly plotted, and it's all really good. So let me see what I can do about getting this turned into 2 graphic novels. So that's what happened next. So the next thing, the original plan was 1 graphic novel. Then it was, you know what, there's actually room to expand a little more. Let's do a 2 graphic novel series. And if the people like it well enough, there are more stories you could tell in this world. And now it's kind of a series. And, as you know, in publishing, successful series are, that's the gold crown for everybody. But then COVID came in, and all of a sudden there was this kind of concern of like, well, what if we release the book and it just happens that nobody can get to the store, and all this time and the money and the cost of everything, maybe it's a smarter play to go month by month and to try to make sure people know about it. And that was really helped by the book Wind, James Tinian book, which is kind of the model that this was based on. Because when they first said single issues, I low-key panicked, because I was like, oh man, I didn't write this to have a proper break every 20 or 22 pages. And really, if you look at the first issue, even that cliffhanger, I would argue, is a bit of a soft cliffhanger. It's more of a, okay, well, what's going to come next, as opposed to, oh my gosh, like something has to happen now kind of
right
thing. And so I was a little nervous, and then they kind of mentioned this Wind model and how it had been really successful, and people had really responded to getting bigger chunks of single issues, and they sort of said to me, hey, Connor, you can find the breaks where you think they make sense. And so that's why, like issue 1 is 38 pages, issue 2 I think is 44, issue 3 is like 32, so it's going to bounce around a little bit. But for me, it's really cool, and I've always wanted to see, I've really wanted to see the comics industry do more of this. But I think you're better off doing bigger books. I think people will respond better to them. I mean, between spending $4 or $5, if you're telling me I'm getting almost twice as much content, I think people in general would respond to bigger books. I think it's a smart way to go, because I think, the biggest complaint you have about singles for people is, well, I love the series, but, it's a lot of money for 20 odd pages. So yeah, it's been really satisfying. It's been really neat. I'd never done something like this, like taking a graphic novel and then had to kind of chop it up. And Boom was really supportive about it. And, there was a little rewriting happen, but not a ton. And yeah, that was kind of how it turned around. And thankfully, from what I've been told, the orders for that first issue surpassed what they were expecting, and they were really, really happy with it. So, that's obviously great news.
Yeah, congrats on that. That's amazing.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask you about the equally excellent artwork is provided by VV Glass from the UK. So I'm wondering, how did you discover each other? And can you talk a bit about the creative process that you two went through to create this series?
Sure. Of course. So Vivi, it's funny. So Vivi and I had met through a friend of mine, Neil Gibson, who runs TPub, which is a publishing company in the UK. They're probably best known for Twisted Dark, which for anybody listening to this, if you like the Twilight Zone, if you wanted the Twilight Zone to be part of a shared universe and more horrific, Twisted Dark is gonna be your puppy. It's twisted. It really is, and in a really delicious way. And so Neil and I had actually been working on a project together, and we'd approached V to work with us on it. And unfortunately for them, or for us, it didn't really work into their schedule at the time. V had other things going. But I'd reached out to V separately and just had said, look, I'm a really big fan of your work, and maybe in the future we might be able to find something to do. And V had said, yeah, I would love to. I'd love to work with you guys now, but you guys have this going on, and I just can't. And then a couple of months later, Boom comes and says, hey, we want to do this thing, and they suggest a couple of artists who are pretty good. But there'd been this one image that V had drawn that we had seen when we were considering her for this TPub project. And the image was really stuck in my mind, and it ended up feeling really perfect for what I was hoping The Last Witch could be. At the time it was called Witchmark. And so I kind of reached back out to V and said, hey, there's this thing I'm doing with Boom, and we need an artist, and I think you'd be great for it, and would you consider it? And thankfully they said yes. They'd kind of cleared their schedule, they were available, and then we started working together. And it's a pretty simple process right now, in the sense of a lot of The Last Witch had been written and plotted out by the time V was brought on board. It wasn't as collaborative as, say, myself and Anthony and Andy Belanger for Kill Shakespeare, where we really, all three of us were really in there together. Mm-hmm. But as we go on, V is a really smart storyteller, so they're really good at making suggestions, and when they make changes to the script, it's generally very strong choices. We've been talking about a kind of a next project together, and so this time around I've gotten V on board with basically just like a 2 or 3 page brainstorm document. Mm-hmm. And so for this one, I think we'll have an opportunity to be more collaborative, which is sort of my preference. As a writer, I'm pretty bullheaded. I'm a pretty strong will in terms of knowing what I want to do, but there are always big chunks of stories where I'm like, I don't know how to get from here to here. I know here and I know there, but how to get from between the two, I can think of 7, 8, maybe different ways it could work. And that's when I love being able to work with somebody else, whether it was working with Anthony Delcall, who also is such a brilliant storyteller. It was, it's certainly not like I was plotting things, he was filling him in. I mean, he was plotting entire arcs easily, and I'd just get his pages and be like, this is brilliant, man, let's do it. But with V, this will give us a chance, I think, to really kind of find our voice together. So that'll be pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to doing more of that work as well. But I mean, knock on wood, like I said, there's a lot we could do with The Last Witch, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do more than what's already on my computer.
Sure. Well, I don't want to spoil too much for the future, but perhaps The Last Witch will continue on, and knock on wood, everything will continue. But do you have any other projects that you can talk about today that are coming up for you down the road?
Oh, for sure. So, I mean, in addition to The Last Witch, it's funny, I was mentioning to you about TPub, so we did move forward with that project, and weirdly enough, that one is also kind of a bit of a Celtic mythology thing, as it turns out. I guess I'm going to try to corner the market. That one, it's called Trickster. It's kind of like a Robin Hood type story. A fairy that is in our world. So basically, it's a leprechaun, and it's fun because leprechauns, if you look at actual the old mythology around them, the reason they're called leprechauns is it basically means they're the son of Lu, who is the sun god in Irish mythology. And so leprechauns were not thought of as, these short, squat guys who want to take your shoes or anything like that, or star in lousy horror movies. They were these kind of all beautiful illusionists. And the reason they were obsessed with gold is because gold is the manifestation of the sun here on Earth. And because of the children of the sun god, that's why gold was important to them. So we created this character, this leprechaun who's been in hiding here on Earth, and kind of is, like I said, this Robin Hood character. He uses these powers of illusion that he has to, even the scale for the people who kind of get stepped on in life. And the full extent of his power, the easy extent is, you could look at him and he can make himself appear however he wants to you. But the far extent would be he could make you and I believe that the room we're in was filled with water, and that illusion would be so powerful that our brain would actually shut down, believing that
Right.
it had run out of oxygen. Right. So like that's the far end. But thankfully our guy's a good guy and he doesn't tend to do that.
That's good.
But yeah, basically Trickster is this story of this Robin Hood type character. And the first adventure of which we're going to be releasing later this year through TPub is kind of a monster of the week style. Hey, wait a second, dark fairies are starting to show up and our heroes got to deal with them. But the bigger story that's going to be teased out through a couple of arcs is this question of why are the fairies coming back now? And there's going to be another question of our hero's past and why did he leave the fairyland and what did he bring with him that the rest of the rest of these dark fairies may want to get their hands on. So it's kind of like it's a little bit like a Shaun of the Dead sort of thing, or it's a little bit like Firefly in the sense of we kind of have a Captain Mal type of lead character who's brave but not infallible. His crew definitely gives him some crap. And it's definitely meant to be a horror comedy, which will hopefully have some pretty creepy moments in it, but will be balanced by some good slapstick and some fun. So where like Last Witch is more kind of like The Secret of Nim or The Dark Crystal or Avatar, where like, I hope it's a story that people want to read to their kids and then their kids will remember it and read it to theirs. I also want it to be that story where if you just love a good fairy tale, you can just read it for yourself. For, who cares if you have kids or not? You can just dig that in. Where Trickster's good, it's more of it's a superhero book, and I've never really written a superhero book, so that's been a real fun journey for me and Neil to do that together. And then the only other couple things that I can kind of just say quickly, I'm working with a friend of mine, Jabola Fagbamiye. We're doing a magical realism take on the life of Fela Kuti, who was this legendary African musician and activist from Nigeria, and he's kind of the African Bob Marley. Protest songs, lots of weed, lots of women. He had 27 wives. He was arrested over 200 times in his life. At one point, the Nigerian government sent 1,000 soldiers to burn down this commune that he had started. He was beaten so bad one of the times he was arrested that he swore he saw his spirit leave his body. He was hugely influential. He created this music called Afrobeat. Miles Davis said that he was the future of music, and he lived a big life. He had an appetite for everything, sex, drugs, rock and roll, but was very political in a way that I think for today's times really resonates. And coming from Africa, I mean, he was talking about class, which really to me is what everything boils down to is the age-old battle of the rich and the poor. And he had a really interesting way of getting into that war. And so we're doing that with HarperCollins. And then I guess the last thing I've got going is not comics, but it's actually the thing that the listening audience could actually get most involved with. It's a project called Future Now, which is going to be a series of short videos that are going to be building out a science fiction world, a really broad, deep science fiction world. I think the website for Future Now might be going live this Friday, like the kind of bare bones one. And we're going to basically be looking for people who love science fiction to come in, play around a little bit in what we've created, and then help us shape the rest of the world. There is sort of an overarching story that will guide people through this world eventually, but right now it's really a chance you can come in and you can see what does the world look like in 2084, and we're going to drop you off all around the globe in space in these virtual worlds, and you can see our vision for what's happened in 2084 when the world is just starting to recover from a series of ecological disasters that led to world wars, civil wars, the breakup of America, the radiation of Russia, the basically disappearance of Japan, and China and India have now risen as the two major world superpowers, and we're at the cusp of another huge conflict, and we invite our viewers to kind of get pulled in and see these sort of 5 secret factions that are battling for the future of humanity.
And what's the website for that?
It's Future Now. I think it's just futurenow.com. The other place, it's by a company called Embreate, which is Embreate. That would be another way to look for it. But I know what we are really looking for people to sign up to our sign up because we're going to be sending out a lot of our kind of behind the scenes content to the early adopters. and really give them an opportunity to help shape what this world is going to become, or at least where we're going to explore first. So yeah, it's been pretty cool. We've gotten I think we have about 50 short stories that we plan to eventually turn into kind of small animated films, and then, oh gosh, 2 or 3 times that at least of what will be short videos that kind of take you through this world and tell you about the breakup of America, or talk to you about the Colossus, these massive hurricanes that devastated basically every coastal city in the world. So it's pretty cool stuff. If you like sci-fi and you like kind of like, it's very grounded in where we are today kind of sci-fi. So if you like kind of looking and going, oh man, I can see how that would happen, it'll be your kind of show.
Cool. Well, it sounds like you got a lot on the go. So I'm wondering where people can find out more about you online and through social media.
Oh, for sure, for sure. If I was smart, I'd have a webpage built by now, but I'm not smart. But I mean, I'm probably most active on my Twitter handle, which is just Conor McCreery. Also, there's the Kill Shakespeare Twitter, which I also contribute to a lot. On Facebook, you can find me on Conor McCreery. There's also a Kill Shakespeare Facebook page, which is kind of where I do a lot of my professional. On Instagram, I'm the real Conor. And most of those places you can, then reach out to me by email and things like that as well. And then also, we're actually just finishing rebuilding the Kill Shakespeare website. If you go there right now, you'll still get the old one, but in the next week or two, the new one will be up. And that'll give you some insight into the old Kill Shakespeare project, which is still going. We still have some plans to do some more stuff with that in the not too distant future. But it also just gives you some insight into what Anthony and I are doing together and then separately as well.
Cool. Well, Conor, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering if there's something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview.
No, I mean, I think you kind of hit everything. I just want to, again, reach out to people and let them know, the first issue of Last Witch came out last week. The second issue will be out in mid-February. There'll be 5 issues for that first original graphic novel. And then after that, we may continue doing single issues, or we may just release the second graphic novel. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, I encourage you, if you have any love for kind of Brothers Grimm, just too scary enough fairy tales, I hope you check out The Last Witch. Myself and Natalia Nesterenko, the colorist, and Jim Campbell, who's on letters, have done a fantastic job, and we're all really proud of it.
Thanks to Conor for the chat. You can discover more about Conor on Twitter at Conor McCreery and online at killshakespeare.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2021.